Staff here at GW's Lisner Auditorium, I'd like to welcome everyone. Not a particularly creepy place here, is it? Well, we opted for size instead of atmosphere, and considering how packed it is here this evening, I think we made the right choice. Normally, of course, we like to hold author talks in our store on Connecticut Avenue Northwest, but for huge events like this, we're very grateful to have Lisner Auditorium. In fact, we and GW have worked together a number of years, and I'd like to thank everyone connected with Lisner who helped make this evening's event possible. I also want to thank all of you for shopping with Politics and Prose, whether at the store or at our website. Like many other independent bookstores in the country today, we're facing a challenging marketplace, but we're fortunate to have a large community of avid book readers here in Washington, and we remain committed to bringing great book events and great authors to the DC area. Now, I'm supposed to reiterate several things that you probably heard coming in. First, after the event, we'll be dismissing everyone by rows. This is to ensure an orderly process as people exit and pick up their books. So please stay in your seats when the event is over and wait for ushers to signal you to get up and depart. Second, it's very important that you hold onto the ticket that you received when you checked in. You'll need to show that ticket on the way out to get a book. And third, during the event, please, no photos. I guess Stephen frightens easily. No, just kidding, but really, no photos, please. Somehow, for all the events that Politics and Prose has sponsored over the years, and all the books that Stephen King has written, we've never hosted him before. Of course, Steve doesn't do many book events. He doesn't need to after so many bestsellers over so many decades. And yet, he does tour some, and we're delighted that this time he's made Washington one of only 6 cities he's visiting. Despite an accident 15 years ago that left him severely injured and giving serious thought to retiring, Steve remains prolific. His latest work, Revival, marks his 50th-something novel, and that's not counting several nonfiction books and numerous novellas and short stories. In fact, just when you can't imagine Steve coming up with another way of terrifying us, he finds an even darker, scarier story to tell. Hallelujah said a gushing review of Revival in USA Today yesterday, quote, "For the king has risen to the occasion once again." This time, the tale follows a small-town boy whose life becomes inextricably bound to his one-time childhood pastor, an increasingly sinister figure who performs mysterious healing using electricity. It's an all-out horror story, but also a meditation on faith, obsession, addiction, and rock and roll. As you'll see in a moment, for a guy who specializes in horror, Steve comes across as disarmingly unthreatening. On the Today Show yesterday, he said, quote, "I've written some pretty awful things in my time, but hey guys, I'm all right." He added, though, with a note intentionally meant to leave us wondering, quote, "But of course, I'd say that, wouldn't I?" Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the exceptional Stephen King.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And now I just want to say, before I say anything else, we're all here in the First Church of loving books and reading, so you ought to give yourselves a hand. Okay? You know what? It's strange to be me in a way. I mean, I'm really delighted that you all came, and it's an incredible auditorium, and it's a big crowd, and I have done my best to scare the shit out of you guys. And I did a signing in New York yesterday at a Barnes & Noble, and this girl comes up to me and she says, "You scared me to death as a kid." And then she says, "Can I have a hug?" So it's kind of like an S&M thing going on there. I'm not sure what it is, but I love it. If I sound a little hoarse or if I clear my throat, have to cough, I do have a little something going on, like a ear, nose, and throat thing or something, but I'm pretty sure it's not Ebola or Captain Trips. That book has been sort of a wonderful thing in a really strange way. Every time a new strain of the flu comes along, I see a sales bulge, and this time, through the roof. So anyway, I've done this off and on. It always scares the hell out of me. Writers are supposed to be secret agents. We're supposed to creep around. Most of us have hermit tendencies, and large crowds scare us. So we're supposed to kind of go around the margins of life and watch things and then sit and write about them. And instead, I found myself doing this every now and then, and I usually do, you know, the same shit pretty much every time, tell the same stories. And I thought that I would refurbish my public speaking thing, so I went to the internet, because I go to the internet for everything now. I think everybody does. Wikipedia is my new god. Everything is on the internet. If you want to know the name of the world's tallest red-headed man, you can go to the internet. It may be totally full of shit, but it will give you a name, and you can quote it and say you got it from the internet. So I went, you know, and I looked up public speaking, and it was the same as when I was a kid. It was the same as in Dale Carnegie, you know, How to Make Friends and Influence People. So one of the things that it said was, start with a joke, because it loosens everybody up, you know. And I like that idea because I love jokes. My wife says that's why she married me. But that wasn't the joke. See, I do have a joke. But it said, tell a joke and enliven everybody up. And so I thought to myself, well, yes, a joke, but it ought to be a really stupid joke. Because I love stupid jokes even more than smart jokes, but also because I felt like if I told the stupid joke, everything I said thereafter would sound a little bit more intelligent. Possibly. So I went to the internet, where you can find everything, and Googled stupid jokes. There are billions of them. So I picked out the stupidest joke that I could find. And I thought, I'm going to use this. And I'm not just going to use it here. I'll use it as long as I'm on tour. Because, as my wife says, with Steve, a joke never loses its savor. I'm telling some of the same ones I told when we were first married. So, okay, so this joke is, it's like a two-line joke. But because I specialize in suspense, I'm going to save the punchline for later on. So this joke starts, no spoilers, because there are a bunch of you there. Somebody will know this joke. Probably somebody is, well, never mind. Okay, so 2 jumper cables walk into a bar. And I read this on the internet, and the first thing I think is, how does that work? 2 jumper cables walk into a bar, and I'm thinking about this when I go to bed at night, and I'm trying to work that out, because that's how my process works. You know, I'll think of something and play around with it. It's some kind of an image, like 2 jumper cables walk into a bar. I mean, there are jokes that don't work that way. You know, like a guy walks in to a bar with an alligator, and the bartender says, "What do you have?" And the guy says, "I'll have a scotch and a lawyer for my alligator." That's a different kind of joke entirely. You know, it's just kind of a lawyer joke, but 2 jumper cables walk into a bar. I like that. So I'm thinking about it. And that's the way the process starts. I get thinking about something like that. Sometimes the story doesn't get done. I've told some of you this story before, but a number of years ago, I was in an airport. My wife and I were going off for, I think, 3 or 4 days somewhere, just the 2 of us. The kids were small. It was a big treat, you know. So my wife said, I have to use the ladies' room. And she went into the ladies' room, and pretty soon a guy came along with his wife or his girlfriend, and she went into the ladies' room, and we're kind of standing there, you know, not saying too much, just waiting outside the ladies' room, you understand? So I started to think that there's sort of like anything could be going on in there, like rites, strange happenings, or whatever. So it's like 2 jumper cables walk into a bar. It's like 2 ladies walk into a ladies' room, and then what happens? So, and I'm just standing there and thinking about it, and pretty soon this kid comes along with his mother, and the mother goes into the ladies' room, and the kid's there with the 2 guys, and we're all standing around. So I went home because after this trip, and I wrote a story called The Ladies' Room, and it was a great story, and the idea was that there would be this airport bathroom, and women would go in, and and they wouldn't come out at all. And little by little, these people would start to gather, these men would start to gather, like, and the guy who is the hero keeps looking at his watch because he's thinking, we're going to miss our flight. And so pretty soon, they grab this matron, you know, somebody, a lady who works for the airport. Matron sounds like a prison, but you know what I'm talking about. So she goes in and she doesn't come out, okay? But they hear her screaming or something, or there's a flash of light or whatever. And I thought to myself, this is great because there's a whole chain here. First, the female airport security guard, and then a couple of guys, male security guards, you know, with guns, and when they don't come out, the police. After the police, the National Guard. Pretty soon it's national news. You know, the airport is surrounded and all this stuff. But so I had 80 or 90 pages, and I couldn't figure out what the fuck was going on in there. So that's it, you know. I'm good friends with John Irving, the novelist, and I heard him say, yeah, go ahead, clap, he's good. John's good. You know, John and I did a reading at Radio City Music Hall with J.K. Rowling. And it was to benefit a couple of foundations. Hers was Doctors Without Borders, actually the people who worked on the crisis in Africa recently. And she's a terrific lady. She's a no bullshit kind of person. I liked her a lot, but when we did this, there were some people who said, well, you'll never fill Radio City Music Hall because it's about writers and it's about books and people want to see One Direction and Justin Bieber and all like that, you know, that stuff. And, you know, I'm saying, like, fuck you. You know, we'll fill it up. You'll fill it up. And we did. We did it for 2 nights. But the thing that was amazing to me was she was like the Beatles, man. We were out there, and every time somebody would say her name or Harry Potter's name, these kids would scream their heads off. And it was wonderful because it was about books, you know. I'm big on books. I love rock, and I love movies, and I love TV, but books are a big deal. So anyway, John Irving says, when I get ready to start a book, the first thing I do is write the last sentence. And I'm thinking, yeah, you probably eat dessert first, too, before you eat anything. I have no idea where I'm going with most of these things. So, you know, in a way, it's a very counterintuitive and sort of wasteful way to work because you have stories like The Ladies' Room. And by the way, I've talked about The Ladies' Room a lot of times in a lot of different talks, and I've always said, and I'll say it to you, go ahead and finish that damn thing, and if it's any good, great, go ahead. We'll publish it as a collaboration, but nobody ever has. Because everything's a letdown after the build-up. So sometimes I'll get an idea like that, and it won't go anywhere. But then, every now and then, something will happen. And I can't remember where all these ideas came from, but back in 77 or 78, something like that, I've always been a big motorcycle person. I had a motorcycle, and it was a Honda. Those were early days. And later on, I got on Harleys, and I've done a lot of little cameos in movies and stuff. And this guy, Kurt Sutter, who does Sons of Anarchy, and don't tell me about the new episode because I haven't seen it. He said, will you come out and do a bit in the show? And I said, I don't think so. It's all the way to California. And he said, I'll put you on a big-ass Harley. And I said, I'm there. He did, too. So anyway, I had a Honda because I didn't know any better. And I got it out in the spring when the snow was gone from Maine, and I started it up, and it wasn't right. It just wasn't running right. And somebody told me, well, you go on up to this guy's farm. He's got you probably know where this is going. He said, go on up. This guy's got a little garage adjacent to his farm, and he's got this unique way of doing things. He tells you what it's going to cost, and that's what it costs. So I went up, and about halfway to this farm, which was way out in East Overshoe, the motor started to skip. And by the time I got to the farm, it was barely running at all, and it died as I pulled into the guy's dooryard. That's what we call it in Maine, a dooryard. So I'm on my motorcycle, and the motorcycle is dead. And from this garage came the biggest goddamn St. Bernard you ever saw in your life. And the guy came out, the mechanic came out, and the dog's going, and it's got that stuff coming out of his eyes, you know, the way that St. Bernards do. And he said, don't worry, Buster is very friendly. And Buster weighed about 250 pounds. And so I walked over toward Buster, and his haunches just sort of coiled down, and his teeth came out. And he actually started to go for me. And the guy brought a socket wrench down on his hind end. And the dog sat still. And I thought I might get an apology, but the guy looked at me and just said, Buster must not have liked your face. So he fixed my motorcycle, and I wrote a book called Cujo, and it worked out. And sometimes it does work out. Sometimes it works out, but it doesn't work out the way you think it's gonna work out. I wrote a book called The Shining, and Jesus, this is like being Led Zeppelin back together again. Play all the hits or something. That's kind of cool, you know. You sit in a room and you write stories and everything, and then you come out here and people have actually read the stories. It's horny. It's good. So anyway, I thought when I wrote The Shining, I said, I had this wonderful idea about this family in this haunted hotel, and what they really want is the boy with psychic powers. And at the end of the book, the hotel will kind of absorb him, and then we'll see the next year, we'll see the whole family as ghosts. But it didn't turn out that way. I feel like you have to follow the characters and you have to follow the story where it leads. And the last thing that I want to do is to spoil a book with plot. So, you know, I think that plot is the last resort of bad writers, as a rule. I'm a lot more interested in character and situation, and you'll follow it where it goes. And, you know, I got a lot of letters after Cujo because the little boy died at the end. Tad, his name was Tad, and he died of heat prostration in the car. And I got a lot of letters saying, how could you kill that little kid? Parenthetically, I got a lot more letters about Greg Stilson kicking a dog to death in the dead zone. People care about dogs in a way they don't about kids. It's weird, but there it is. Hey, I don't make the news, I just report it, you know what I'm saying? So anyway, I had no idea that Tad was going to die, and I had no idea that Danny and his mother were going to live, but I was really glad when they did. Same idea with Salem's Lot, my vampire book, and I was teaching school at that time, high school, and I had a class called Fantasy and Horror, and we read Dracula in the class, and I thought to myself, this book, written at the end of the 19th century, is about the triumph of science and technology over superstition. Because, you know, basically, once Count Dracula comes to London, he's screwed. Because they use all this Sherlock Holmes stuff to track him down. There are phonograph diaries and all this scientific investigation, and they finally send him packing. And I thought, well, that's great. The technology is great, and Bram Stoker was obviously totally fascinated by all these technical developments. But when I sat down to write Salem's Lot in 1974 and 1975, we were looking at the other end of the rainbow with a lot of pollution and resource depletion and just nuclear waste, A-bombs, and all the rest of it. And I thought, you know, it seems to me that technology has outraced our morality. You know, we've learned how to build a lot of things, but we still got these bad fucking tempers. So I thought to myself, I'm going to write this book, and I'm going to kind of bounce it off Dracula the whole time. But at the end, the vampires are going to win. I didn't know, but they came along and did The Strain later on, and that actually turned out to be the case. So anyway, I thought all the characters in that book would die, and some of them lived. I'm delighted that they lived, but they lived on their own. I just record these things as they come through my head. So sometimes the books work out, sometimes they don't. Sometimes the ideas work out, sometimes they don't. And sometimes they're too good to let go even when they don't work out. I wrote a book called Gerald's Game. Pretty nasty piece of work. Without going into too many of the details, this woman ends up handcuffed to bedposts and her husband drops dead of a heart attack. They're playing a game, which happens to be Gerald's Game, and she's like that. And I thought, this is great. But, you know, my wife said, you know, you wrote this book, Misery, that just about had two characters. There was a writer and there's his #1 fan, this crazy nurse, Annie Wilkes, who was great. The movie was terrific, too. They're not always, but that movie was good. And she said to me, okay, you wrote a book with two characters in a cabin, and now you're going to write this book about this woman who is alone in a bedroom. The next book you write is going to be called Living Room Couch. and it's going to have no characters at all. I haven't gotten to that one yet. But anyway, see, I went into that book full of confidence. I hadn't written the last line or anything, but I thought to myself, but I know what's going to happen. I love physical stuff in books. I love imagery. I love the best part of writing something for me. You can trudge through days and not have a real, I don't know what you'd call an experience. And then some days, everything comes clear, and you're like in that story, and you can see everything. I tell people, the only way I know how to explain it is when it's really going good, you know what's on the right, and you know what's on the left, and you know everything. You're in that world. So I had it figured out about Jessie Burlingame, because I thought to myself, okay, what's going to happen is she's going to do this total skin the cat maneuver. She's going to put her feet up over her head and turn over and get out of it that way. And then I thought, what if that's not possible? So I called to my son Joe, who was then about 14 or 15. He now writes as Joe Hill. But he was 14 or 15, and he was really limber. You ought to read his books, by the way. They're on sale at a bookstore near you. Nosferatu, Horns. Made a great movie with Daniel Radcliffe. Good movie. Lock and Key, some other stuff. So I'm only a little jealous. He's young and good looking. But I take comfort in the fact that he will get old. No, I'm just teasing. But anyway, he was 14 or something, and I'm getting ready to write this. And by that time, see, the other thing that happens is you're no longer in a vacuum. You know that people are going to read what you write. It was a little easier in those days because they actually had to write a letter instead of blogging, "You asshole, nobody could do that." Everybody looks at it. So anyway, I said, "Joe, come upstairs." So Joe came upstairs. I said, "Lay down on this bed, Joe." So he lies down on the bed, and I said, "Put your hands up. I'm going to tie you to this bedpost with a couple of ropes, and I'm going to see if you can get out without untying the ropes." So he said, "Yeah, okay, great." He was always up for stuff like that. So I tied into the bedpost, and I said, "Now try to skin the cat and see if you can, like, what I want you to do, Joe, is skin the cat, get over between the bedstead and the wall, and push the bed toward the window like you were going to break it, get some glass, and cut these things, you know, whatever." He said, "Okay." And my wife came upstairs and said, "What in God's name are you doing?" And Joe said, "Oh, it's some of Dad's shit." But here's the thing. Here's the thing. He couldn't do it. So I said, "Well, I'm fucked. What am I going to do?" Well, anyway, that's why they paid me the big bucks. I figured it out. She basically took a glass. I'm spoiling this for you, but, you know, I don't care. Anyway, I'll put it this way. There's an operation called degloving, which makes it possible to slide and stuff. So that worked out okay. I'm keeping an eye on the clock here. I don't want to get too carried away. What else was I going to say? Anything? I was going to talk about Pet Sematary, but why the hell would I do that? Let me just say, I mean, that's another one, you know, that's, in a way, it's like Revival. It's just sort of a balls-to-the-wall horror story. And people, I put it in a drawer for about a year. I said, nobody's going to want to read this. But they did. It was good. I mean, it was great. But I got a reputation. You see what I'm saying? I was like the girl on that street, you know, where everybody says, "You know that girl, she's got a reputation." So I had a reputation. What I didn't understand was that Boris Karloff was going to die, and Alfred Hitchcock, and Rod Serling, and pretty soon I became sort of like the Great Pumpkin. It's a tough job, but somebody's got to do it, you know what I'm saying? So anyway, I got a reputation as a horror writer, and I never minded as long as I could write whatever I wanted. The readers knew what they wanted, and I would argue time and time again that what they really come back for is the voice more than anything else. They don't necessarily want blood, guts, and brains in their teeth, but they don't mind it either. Anyway, I got a reputation as a scary guy, and a couple of years ago, we go to the Sarasota area in Florida in the winter. We didn't really want to, but we turned 65, and it's like the law. You have to go. They don't call it the home of the newlywed and nearly dead for nothing. So we're down there in Florida, and my wife sent me to the market one day, and I was picking up some stuff, and I came around the corner. There's this old lady, and she looked up, and she said, "I know who you are. I recognize you. I've seen you on TV. You're Stephen King. You write those scary things." Well, that's all right for some people. Scary things are all right for some people, but I don't care for that sort of thing myself. I don't read it. I like uplifting things like that Shawshank Redemption. So I said, "I wrote that," and she said, "No, you didn't." So that's just the way it goes. You get a reputation. Anyway, I want to read from this new book. Thank you. If you ask me where I got the idea for this book, it would be, man, I don't know. No one place, really. But I've always been fascinated by revival meetings, tent shows, come to Jesus kind of things. It's in the Green Mile, too, a little bit. With faith healings as a kid, you know, Oral Roberts, and you'd put his hand on people's foreheads and say, "Heal in the name of Jesus." And they'd throw their crutches away and stuff. And I was fascinated by that. But also, I've always loved the Frankenstein story. And I had never actually written a story about a mad scientist. And I sort of wanted to do that, but I wanted him to be a human being as well. And in those movies, to me, the best part was always when they're in Frankenstein's castle and the lightning hits the top of the thing, and Igor says, "Master, it's alive!" I really kind of wanted to get that in my story, so I knew that I would have to put some lightning in there. But I also wanted to write about rock and roll, because I never found a way to write about it. There are some things that are almost impossible to write about unless you come at it from the side, particularly the things that mean a lot to you personally, because I lived for rock and roll. It made me a bigger person than I was, because I was just this little dipshit kid from the country. And I picked up a guitar when I was 12 or 13 years old. And, well, this is, I almost don't need to go any further, because what I'm going to read is autobiographical, more or less. Not completely. I'll read for 20 or 25 minutes, or somebody blows a kazoo, and then I'll stop and we'll have Q&A. In 1963, before the Beatles burst on the scene, a brief but powerful infatuation with folk music gripped America. The TV show that came along at the right time to capitalize on the craze was Hootenanny, featuring such Caucasian interpreters of the black experience as the Chad Mitchell Trio and the New Christie Minstrels. Perceived commie Caucasians like Pete Seeger and Joan Baez were not invited to perform. My brother Conrad was best friends with Billy Paquette's older brother, Ronnie, and they watched the hoot, as they called it, every Saturday night at the Paquette's house. At that time, Ronnie and Billy's grandfather lived with the Paquettes. He was known as Hector the Barber because that had been his trade for almost 50 years, although it was hard to visualize him in the role. Barbers, like bartenders, are supposed to be pleasantly chatty types, and Hector the Barber rarely said anything. He just sat in the living room, tipping capfuls of bourbon whiskey into his coffee and smoking Tiparillos. The smell of them permeated the whole house. When he did talk, his discourse was peppered with profanity. He liked hootenanny, though, and always watched it with Con and Ronnie. One night, after some white boy sang something about how his baby left him and he felt so sad, Hector the Barber snorted and said, "Shit, boys, that ain't the blues." "What do you mean, Grandpa?" Ronnie asked. "Blues is mean music. That boy sounded like he just peed the bed and he's afraid his mama might find out." The boys laughed at this, partly out of delight, partly in amazement that Hector was actually something of a music critic. "You wait," he said, and slowly mounted the stairs, yanking himself along by the banister with one gnarled hand. He was gone so long the boys had almost forgotten about him when Hector came back down carrying a beat-up silver-toned guitar by the neck. Its body was scuffed and held together with a hank of frayed hay rope. The tuning keys were crooked. He sat down with a grunt and a fart and hauled the guitar onto his bony knees. "Shut that shit off," he said. Ronnie did so. That week's hoot was almost over anyway. "I didn't know you played, Grandpa," he said. "8 years," Hector said. "Put it away when the arthritis started to bite. I don't even know if I can tune the bitch anymore." "Language, Dad," Mrs. Paquette called from the kitchen. Hector the Barber paid no attention to her. Unless he needed her to pass the mashed potatoes, he rarely did. He tuned the guitar slowly, muttering curses under his breath, then played a chord that actually sounded a bit like music. "You could tell it was still off," Con said when he told me the story later, "but it was pretty cool anyway." "Wow," Ronnie said. "Which chord is that, Grandpa?" "E. All this shit starts with E." "But wait, you ain't heard nothing yet. Let me see if I can remember how this whoremaster goes." From the kitchen, "Language, Dad." He paid no more mind this time, only began to strum the old guitar, using one horny, nicotine-yellowed fingernail as a pick. He was slow at first, muttering more unapproved language under his breath, but then he picked up a steady, chugging rhythm that made the boys glance at each other in amazement. His fingers slid up and down the fretboard, clumsily at first, then, as old memory synapses guttered back to life, a little more smoothly. B to A to G and back home to E. It's a progression I played 100,000 times, although in 1963 I wouldn't have known an E chord from a spinal cord. In a high, wailing voice, unlike the one in which he spoke, when he did speak, Ronnie's grandpa sang, "Why don't you drop down, darling? Let your daddy see. You got something, darling, keep on worrying me." Mrs. Paquette came in from the kitchen, drying her hands on a dish towel and looking as if she had seen some exotic bird, an ostrich or perhaps an emu, strutting down the middle of Route 9. Billy and little Rhonda Paquette, who couldn't have been no more than 5, came halfway down the stairs, leaning over the railing and goggling at the old man. "That beat," Con told me later, "it sure wasn't like anything they play on hootenanny." Hector the Barber was now thumping his foot in time and grinning. Con said he had never seen the old man grin before, and it was a little scary, like he had turned into some kind of singing vampire. "My mama don't allow me to fool around all night long. She's afraid some woman might, he drew it out, might not treat me right." "Go, Grandpa," Ronnie shouted, laughing and clapping his hands. Hector launched into the second verse, the one about how the Jack of Diamonds told the Queen of Spades to go on and start her creeping ways, but then a string broke. Twang! "Oh, you dirty cunt," he said. And that was it for Hector the Barber's impromptu concert. Mrs. Paquette snatched away his guitar, the broken string flying dangerously close to her eye, and told him to go on outside and sit on the porch if he was going to talk that way. Hector the barber did not go out on the porch, but he did lapse back into his accustomed silence. The boys never heard him sing and play again. He died the following summer, and Charles Jacobs, still going strong, in 1964, the year of the Beatles, officiated at his funeral. The day after that abbreviated version of Arthur Big Boy Crudup's My Mama Don't Allow Me, Ronnie Paquette found the guitar in one of the swill barrels out back, deposited there by his outraged mom. Ronnie took it to school where Mrs. Calhoun, the English teacher who doubled as a middle school music teacher, showed him how to put on a new string and how to tune it by humming the first 3 notes of taps. She also gave Ronnie a copy of Sing Out, a folk music magazine that had both lyrics and chord changes to songs like Barbary Allen. During the next couple of years, with a brief hiatus, the two boys learned folk song after folk song, trading the old guitar back and forth as they learned the same basic chords Leadbelly no doubt strummed during his prison years. Neither of them could play worth a tin shit, but Con had a pretty good voice, although too sweet to be convincing on the blues tunes he loved, and they performed in public a few times as Con and Ron. They flipped a coin to see whose name would come first. Con eventually got his own guitar, a Gibson acoustic with a cherry finish. It was a hell of a lot nicer than Hector the Barber's old Silvertone, and it was the one they used when they sang stuff like Seventh Son, Sugarland at the Eureka Grange on Talent Night. Our dad and mom were encouraging, and so were Ronnie's folks, but Geigo holds true for guitars as well as computers. Garbage in, garbage out. I paid little attention to Con and Ron's attempts to attain local stardom as a folk duo, and hardly noticed when my brother's interest in his Gibson guitar began to wither away. After Reverend Jacobs drove his old new car out of Harlow, it felt to me as though there were a hole in my life. As 1965 gave way to 1966 and then 1967, Con stopped singing, and the cessation of badly rendered tunes like Don't Think Twice, It's All Right from upstairs wasn't even on my radar. By then, Con was all about high school athletics. I'm going to skip ahead here. Picking up Con's guitar never occurred to me. If I wanted music, I turned on the radio. But talent is a spooky thing and has a way of announcing itself quietly but firmly when the right time comes. Like certain addictive drugs, talent comes as a friend long before you realize it is a tyrant. I found that out for myself the year that I turned 13. First this, then that, then the other thing. That's how the world works. My musical talent was far from huge, but it was much larger than Con's or anyone else's in our family, for that matter. I discovered it was there on a boring, overcast Saturday in the fall of 1969. Everybody else in the family, even Claire, who was home from college for the weekend, had gone over to Gates Falls for the football game. Con was then a junior and a starting tailback for the Gates Falls Gators. I stayed home because I had a stomach ache, although it wasn't as bad as I made out. I just wasn't much of a football fan, and besides, it looked like it was going to rain. I watched TV for a while, but there was more football on 2 channels and golf on a 3rd, even worse. Claire's old bedroom was now Connie's, but some of her paperbacks were still stacked in the closet, and I thought I might try one of the Agatha Christie's. Claire said they were easy to read, and it was fun to detect along with Miss Marple or Hercule Poirot. I walked in and saw Con's Gibson in the corner, surrounded by an untidy heap of old Sing-Out magazines. I looked at it, leaning there, and long forgotten, and thought, I wonder if I could play Cherry Cherry on that. I remember that moment as clearly as my first kiss, because the thought was an exotic stranger, utterly unconnected to anything that had been in my mind when I walked into Con's room. I'd swear to it on a stack of Bibles. It wasn't even like a thought. It was like a voice. I took the guitar and sat down on Con's bed. I didn't touch the strings at first, just thought about that song some more. I knew it would sound good on Connie's acoustic because Cherry Cherry is built around an acoustic riff, not that I knew that word then. I listened to it in my head and was astounded to realize I could see the chord changes as well as hear them. I knew everything about them except where they were hiding on the fretboard. I grabbed an issue of Sing Out at random and looked for a blues, any blues. I found one called Turn Your Money Green and saw how to make an E. All this shit starts with E, Hector the Barber had told Con and Ronnie, and played it on the guitar. The sound was muffled but true. The Gibson was a fine instrument and it stayed in tune even though it had been neglected. I pushed down harder with the first 3 fingers of my left hand. It hurt, but I didn't care because E was right. E was divine. It matched the sound in my head perfectly. It took Con 6 months to learn the House of the Rising Sun, and he was never able to go from D to F without a hesitation as he arranged his fingers. I learned the 3-chord Cherry Cherry riff, E to A to D and back to A, in 10 minutes. Then realized I could use the same 3 chords to play Gloria by Shadows of the Night, Louie Louie by the Kingsmen. I played until my fingertips were howling with pain and I could hardly unbend my left hand. When I stopped, it wasn't because I wanted to, but because I had to. And I couldn't wait to start again. I didn't care about the New Christie Minstrels or Ian and Sylvia or any of those folk singing assholes, but I could have played Cherry Cherry all day. It had the way to move me. Thanks. Now that wasn't too scary, was it? But you see, when I write about music and playing guitar, it feels like, for me, it feels like writing about learning to write and learning the joys of the job. And some of you may know I played for years, well, I call it that, with a group called the Rock Bottom Remainders. You wouldn't do that if you'd heard us. A lady named Kathy Goldmark put the band together, and it became a very important part of her life. And we played a lot of gigs, and in fact, the Remainders are playing in Phoenix this year. I remember one night in particular. What happened was we played one gig. We were supposed to play the one thing and then just stop, right? And after the thing was over, Dave Barry was kind of like the leader of the band, and he and I were sitting in the lobby of this hotel where we played, and I said, this is too good, we got to do it again. And Dave said, yes, we do. We ought to have a tour. We ought to get a bus and play a bunch of gigs. And I said, well, Dave, I'll have to learn how to play some bar chords, because I'd learned to play folk guitar, and man, I didn't know from bar chords, but he showed me and it opened a whole new world. So we played a whole bunch of gigs, and one of them was in Louisville, Kentucky. And it was a honky-tonk. And it was like, have any of you seen that movie Roadhouse with, it was like that. It was like that, only in that movie, it was the Jeff Healey Band, and we weren't the Jeff Healey Band. We've got Greg Iles on lead guitar now, and he can really shred. He's great, but we didn't have anybody like that in those days. And so we get to this club, and there's chicken wire in front of the stage, right, to about waist high. They had a good shot at your head if they wanted to take it. And one of the guys, you know, the ones that have security written across their chest, so approximately the size of a Ryder moving van. And we're getting ready for sound check, and I went in to use the bathroom, and he comes in and he says, are you guys a joke band? And I said, well, I don't really know how to answer that. And he said, well, Because people around here, he said, they don't really get the joke about music. So I looked at that chicken wire, and we played our asses off that night. But I loved it, and so I had a chance to write a little bit about it in this book, and that was a great thing. And I had another point to make. I forgot what it was, but I had a few notes on a piece of paper that I put in my back pocket. But I did want to say one thing, and that is that mostly what I do, I'm having a good time. You know, I really am. I'm enjoying it, and if that gets passed on to you, that's a good thing. That's a good thing. When somebody comes up and says to me, you got me through a tough time, what else can you ask for? Well, you can ask for a few royalties and everything, but, and I realize, of course, that you guys there put my kids through college, and I appreciate that. But mostly I just do it because I have fun. And 6 or 8 years ago, I was doing an interview, and I told a lady from the Los Angeles paper that I was thinking about retiring because I'd had an accident, and I was in a lot of pain, and it was very tough for me to write. But I felt better. That's a great gift. So now I feel like I'm okay. And I don't want to keep you here all night, but I do want to play Freebird. Do you have questions? Does somebody have a mic up there? I can't see for shit down here, but go ahead. Ask me anything. I won't necessarily answer, but I might. Yes. What?
All right. My question's really simple. You started off with a joke about two jumper cables walking into a bar.
I did.
What was the punchline for that?
Not yet. Next question.
Mr. King?
Yeah.
Over here, the microphone.
I know, but everybody sounds like they're right next to me.
To your right.
Go ahead.
I'm a big Red Sox fan, just like you are. Let's go Red Sox.
Let's go Red Sox.
That's right.
Let's go Nats. See, I can root for the Nats because they're in the National League.
One of my favorite books is The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon.
Uh-huh.
And I was wondering why you picked Tom Gordon for the character. I mean, you could have done a horror story, The Girl Who Loved Bill Buckner.
Yeah, or The Girl Who Loved Chris Christie.
That's true.
That'd be really weird, wouldn't it? Little girl lost in the woods praying for Chris Christie to save her. And he shows up, man. He shows up and says, yeah, shut the fuck up, little girl. Shut up and sit down, little girl. I picked Tom Gordon because, to me, at that time, he was the guy who saved games for the Red Sox.
Yes.
And the little girl was lost in the woods, and I loved the idea. And it was one of the things where I thought, I can write this story, and this little girl can be really lost in the woods, and her one link to the real world is this, the games that she listened to with her father. Mm-hmm. And then the idea of the person who's the closer, the person who's supposed to save close games, became, you know, a very powerful way of saying this girl is trying to save herself. So
it was
I
a
like
great
that.
book. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. That's very kind. You know, I'll tell you something about The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon. Every now and then somebody will come up to me and say, my little boy or my little girl is 12 years old and wants to read one of your books. Which one do you recommend? And basically I say, you know, I don't write YA and I don't write adult and I don't write horror, I don't write westerns, I don't write any of that stuff. There are elements of all those things, but I say if you're old enough to read them, fine, go for it, whatever. And, you know, I can remember having discussions with the publishers of The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon, she utters the word fuck once in that book. It's just once. And my editor said, is it possible to take this out because we can get it in junior high libraries without it? And I said, no, you can't. You can't. And in a way, that's one of the things that I'm sort of, that I love about reading, and one of the reasons why. I wrote a book about writing called On Writing. And, oh man, you guys are great. I love that. That's crazy, man. But anyway, there's a fair amount of profanity and vulgarity in that particular book. And I thought to myself, you know, this will probably not be approved for classroom reading with some of that language in it. And then I thought, I don't give a shit. I really don't. Because I think that you don't necessarily become a writer because of classes. I might be, you know, stepping on somebody's toes here, but I think writing can be learned, but I'm not convinced it can be taught, okay? So if you've got a book like On Writing, some kid takes home and reads in his bedroom just because he wants to read it, I think that's better. I wandered from your question, I'm sorry. Does somebody else have a question?
Right here.
Well, he was first.
Here we go.
Right here.
Go ahead.
I know that you had alluded to it with Pet Sematary, but if you have ever dealt with self-criticism in writing, and if so, how have you done it? Like, how have you dealt with it?
Well, I deal with it every day. You want it to be the best that it can be. And so my assumption is always that what I've written first needs to be improved. And sometimes when it's really bad, it has to be scrapped. I'm not sure that's what you mean. The process that I go through with a book is first draft, second draft, polish, and I can polish every day's work so that I can produce a clean manuscript at the end of X number of months, or in the case of a book like 11/22/63, a little bit longer, but you know, that was like a historical novel, and that was a lot like work. and I still got this huge stack of books about the 60s and Kennedy and Oswald in the corner, and I don't even try to look at it. It gives me the horrors. But you have to be careful, and you have to be willing to take outside criticism too from editors, and the more successful you are, the more you need to try to do the right thing. That's all I can say.
Thank you.
So Steve, over here, Steve.
Where are you?
There you go.
Wave.
There you go, right here.
All right.
First of all, thank you for coming to D.C. My wife's face lit up when she knew you were coming. And I don't have a question for you, but a simple request. You're her birthday gift tonight. So if you could throw a simple wave over to my gorgeous wife. Jennifer, stand up, please. Jennifer, stand up. Can you throw a wave to her?
Come on, Jennifer, stand up.
Thank you. She's right there. Give her a happy birthday. All right.
Happy birthday, Jennifer. Now, if I were Wayne Newton, I would say, let's all sing happy birthday to Jennifer, but on the other hand, let's not. Somebody got a question up there in back? You have to yell because I blew out my ears listening to AC/DC. Go ahead. What?
Future of Dark Tower.
Oh, the future of the Dark Tower? Well, I don't know. I don't know. I know that there are things in that saga that I didn't tell. I'm a little bit wary about going back. Simply because there are fantasy series that I actually love to read. The Lord of the Rings was one, but that doesn't necessarily mean I want to read 10 volumes of Christopher Tolkien's Silmarillion or something. So I don't want to go to the well too often, but I think about Roland the Gunslinger, and sometimes I dream about him. And I don't know how many of you have read those books, but they're all... Very cool, very cool. But there's something that's alluded to a lot, the Battle of Jericho Hill, where all of Roland's young friends are killed and he escapes. And I know how that happens. And I would like to write it because, again, you know, for me, the part that's exciting is to see. And I can see what's going on there. I can see these people with their blue faces that are attacking the last vestiges of civilization and everything. So I'd really like to write that at some point. I don't know. Maybe I will. No, I can't do it tomorrow. I have to go to Kansas City tomorrow. But at some point, you know, there are other worlds than these. Kansas City, for instance. Yeah, the Dark Tower, I mean, that has its devotees. And I am one myself. And the funny thing is those books were written over a period of years with no particular urge on my part for it to be published on a wide basis. And every time I came back, I just fell into those characters and those stories again. I enjoyed it. It was great. Somebody else got a question?
Start. Okay.
Oh, you know what I was going to say? Hold that thought for a minute. It's funny you were asking about whether there were other things. There's another story from The Stand, too. And it's about Stu and Franny and Kojak going back east. And I know that story. I just haven't written it yet. It wouldn't be a whole novel, but it's a good story. It really would be a good one. And I don't want to say it because, like, I could tell you some of what the story is, but it's like pissing it out on the ground. And once you do it, you lose the urge to. Go ahead. What's your question?
Okay. I'm just wondering, what is your strangest / creepiest interaction with a fan has been? What was that? I mean, hopefully it wasn't like Misery, but yeah.
I don't think he was a fan, but a guy broke into our house and said he had a bomb. And, oh, I know, he was like an anti-fan because he had gotten this idea that I had stolen his aunt's story by some sort of ultrasonic ESP radar stealth plane that had flown over and stolen his aunt's thoughts or something. And he broke into our house, and I wasn't there, which was very smart of me. I had taken my son to see a Celtics game in Philadelphia, and my wife was there, and she came downstairs in her nightgown, and here's this guy standing in our kitchen with a cigar box, and he said, "I have a bomb." She was out the door, man, in her bare feet and across the street. She didn't wait to discuss it. She didn't want to talk about Annie Wilkes or anything. She just ran across the street to the neighbor's house and called the police, who found him in the attic, and the bomb was carefully wired together pencils. And you had to feel a little bit sorry for the guy who was, but he was, I guess you wouldn't call that a fan. But most of the people that I meet are fairly nice. I mean, every now and then you meet somebody who's clearly doesn't have like all four wheels on the road, but that's all right. Most of my, you know, I say to people all the time, you know, I write these things, these fantasies, and they're the sort of things that people, paranoid ideas and fantastic and monsters in the closet and everything, and people go to psychiatrists and pay $90 or $100 an hour to get rid of those, and I write them down and people pay me. So it's a great gig. Go ahead, ask me something else. I'll try to move along a little faster.
Hi there. Hi.
It's funny because it's like you're over here.
Right.
See, wait, she's in this black box here. Go ahead.
Okay. So my best friend Jody, who still lives in small town Ohio where we grew up, from her and me, thank you for your stories.
Well, you're very welcome.
My question is, how has aging changed your writing process at all, if it has?
Slowed it down. Slowed it down a little bit, you know, but I still like what I'm doing. And, you know, I think every now and then I'll have a really great idea, and then I'll say, yeah, but I wrote that one in 1982. Because you explore the room to its corners, but then there's always stuff under the rug. I think that there always are more stories, and as long as I'm 2 or 3 ahead, I'm happy. But when I was 25, man, it was like they were all trying to escape at the same time. And that slowed down a lot. So if I have 2 or 3 ideas ahead, I'm cool with that. But I'm just glad I can still do it a little bit, so I have fun. Yes?
You've created so many characters over the years.
God, I have so many characters over the years.
I know, and then so many of them have reappeared in other books. Mm-hmm. Okay, gun to your head, your #1 favorite character to write about.
My #1 favorite...
You have to pick one. I can hear your answer being there's too many.
Yeah. I must answer.
Yes. I have several in mind, but I want to know what yours is.
Annie Wilkes was fun. Annie Wilkes was a brat. She was a cock-a-doodle brat, but she was fun to write about. If I had to pick one good person, Dolores was cool, yes. She's the one that says sometimes being a bitch is all a woman has. Dolores Claiborne was based on my mother. You're right, she was a good one. I liked Lacey Landon from Lacey's Story because she had a little bit of she had a little bit of my my own wife in her, a little tiny bit, not entirely, because it's a mistake to see any of these people as, you know, one-to-one analogs. It's always make-believe. They're always, you know, partly made up of a number of people. But I also like the boys in a story called The Body that was made into a film called Stand By Me. Gordy LaChance is in there. I never had friends like I did when I was 11. And I think that's true of most people. That's like the time when you discover... Why, what's yours?
Oh, mine was Roland.
Oh, Roland.
Yeah.
Well, if I had to pick somebody from the Dark Tower stories, I'd pick Eddie Dean. I thought he was sort of a cool guy. I liked him, and I liked Richie from Richie Tozier from It.
Yeah. Beep beep Richie.
Beep beep Richie. That's right. Beep beep. Well, let's do a couple more, and then I'll go to Kansas City.
Hi.
You won't care. Go ahead.
So, first off, I want to say I read It when I was 10, and you've
See, there's a sick pup right there. She read It when she was 10.
And you've been scaring me ever since, so thank you. Yeah. So, but my question is, so I teach 5th grade in Virginia, where until recently writing was assessed through standardized testing. Awesomeness. So now I'm trying to teach my 10-year-olds how to break out of that format, that 5-paragraph essay, and really love to write. What one piece of advice would you give them?
Read a lot of books. Read a lot of books. And I think that for most of us, what happens, at least I can only speak for myself, I tried to copy the styles and to kind of get some of the excitement of the things that I read in my own fiction, and that was how I started and how I started to, you know, build up an interest in those things. So I think the only road to writing that's self-propelled is reading.
Thank you. I'll tell them that tomorrow.
Okay.
Hi, Mr. King.
Hello.
My turn. First of all, thank you. I'm a big fan. But we've already talked about some of the other books and whether there would be other stories. How about The Talisman?
Oh,
would there be more of that?
Yeah. Yeah, I was actually together with Peter Straub yesterday.
Yeah. We saw the pictures.
We got together and we talked in New York. We've done 2 books of a trilogy, The Talisman and Black House, and I'm hoping that the 2 of us can collaborate and write the 3rd one next year.
Thank you.
We've talked about the story, and I've wanted to go back for a long time because I want to write about Jack Sawyer. So, yeah, I think we'll go back. I think we'll do that. I don't know if anybody will remember the first couple, but they can always read them again. So, do you have a question over here?
So first, Mr. King, I can't thank you enough for your literary and horrific genius that brought my grandmother and me closer together when she was alive and kept us closer after her passing. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
And to my question now, it has been over 30 years since you last wrote about the horror genre in Dance Macabre.
Oh, yeah.
How do you feel that the genre has evolved since then, and have you considered writing a successor to Dance to cover that?
I've thought about that, yeah. I'm not sure that I'm the person to do it anymore because it's easy to fall out of touch with some of the new stuff. But I would certainly like to write a long essay, and I'd like to pitch it around the so-called found footage genre. I can remember my son, I got in an accident. I got hit by a van, and I was in the hospital. And to cheer me up, my son Joe brought in a screener of the Blair Witch Project. You have to picture me in this hospital room. I mean, everything was broken, and I was in pain. But the good part about it is, okay, I've been straight and sober since 1987. And after that accident, I could have all the drugs I wanted. It was okay. It was like landing on free parking in a way, and I was thinking, if I'd known this, I would have broken my ass before this. No, I'm kidding about that, but the point I'm trying to make is, I was wrecked to the eyeballs, and in pain, a lot of pain, and he brings in this film, and we got about halfway through it, and I said, turn it off. Me, I was scared to death. And when I finally saw the end of it, and that image still lingers of that young man standing in the corner in the basement. And this is a very rare thing for, when you're a kid, you get scared, and little by little you start to get case hardened, you know? And the Blair Witch Project broke through for me, and and it spawned this whole series of movies about found footage. But when I say case hardened, things have changed a lot. Brian De Palma made a film out of Carrie, and I was a very young writer, and you know, I got no particular consideration, and certainly nobody sent me a screener or set up a screening or anything like that. I don't think screeners had been invented in 1975. That's how old I am. But anyway, they had sneak previews on Halloween night, I think 1975. And the idea was that they would piggyback Carrie on another film, and you would get 2 for the price of 1, and that way they would get an idea of what the potential was for the film. So they were going to do a screening, one of these screenings in Boston. And I said to my wife, let's go in the car and go down and see what they made out of my book. And she said, okay, so we went down. Well, the film was in Roxbury, which at that time was a fairly black suburb, and it was playing with a black, not exploitation, but a black-oriented comedy called Norman, Is That You?, which starred Red Fox. And we were like 2 little grains of salt in a pepper shaker in that theater. And Norman, Is That You? Was really funny, and the audience was rocking and rolling and everything. And I leaned over to my wife and said, what's coming next is a film about a little skinny white girl with menstrual problems. And this audience is gonna fucking hate it. And she said, God bless her, I mean, she fished Carrie out of the trash. I threw it away, and she picked it out. And so she said, well, why don't you wait and see? So they really got into it. And I was just amazed, but they were like totally on her side. And, you know, it was like the girls are pelting Carrie with sanitary napkins, and people in this theater are yelling, kill those bitches, you know, and stuff. Because in those days, they screamed at the screen. You know, they don't do it. People are so sophisticated now. It'd be like, don't go up those stairs. Like Jamie Lee Curtis is going to hear you and say, okay, I won't go up those stairs, you know. Get a life. So this is the thing. The end of the movie comes, and De Palma did something that nobody had done up to that time. You think the movie's over. And Sue Snell goes to Carrie's grave, and there's this music playing. It's kind of sweet and everything. See, I mean, this is such a trauma that some of you are already going, oh, God, no. Because you know. And in the middle of this, while she's putting flowers on the grave, all through the movie, behind my wife and me, there were these two guys that were the size of NFL players, you know? They were these great big, broad-shouldered, strapping guys. And that arm comes out of the grave, and they scream like a couple of little girls. And they're hugging each other. And I hear one of them saying, that's it, that girl ain't never gonna be right. And I thought to myself, I may have a future in this business. One more question.
I was just wondering, with all that's been said, with all the stories, is however many hundreds of years people have been looking to read a story for entertainment, do you think we're actually running out of things to say? And number two, when you were first starting, I'm sorry, they're tied together, I swear. When you were first starting and you were getting down to writing
He's like Columbo. Wait a minute, I have one more question.
How do you deal with discouragement and wondering whether or not what you are getting down to write has been done before?
Oh. Well, particularly in the horror genre, there are only 3 or 4 really good ideas, and we've all done them before, and it's really, okay, I mean, like, how many times in your life have you eaten eggs? But there's always a new way to fix eggs, and, you know, I look at it that way. You can always find a new way to do it. But, I think that there are as many ideas as there are sort of probing, talented minds to explore those ideas. And I don't want to end on that, so one more. Somebody want?
Hey, I got one.
I want to ask a question. Do you see the influence that your story, The Stand, has had on current stories like The Walking Dead, things like that? Do you see a major influence in the stories that are out today?
Well, I don't know. I guess it might have a little bit of an influence on The Walking Dead. First of all, you have to put it in perspective and remember that The Stand wasn't the first one. There was a book by M.P. Shield called The Purple Cloud in 1909 that was about the end of humanity and the few survivors. And there's a book called Earth Abides by George Stewart in, I think, 1954. And then a book called I Am Legend by Richard Matheson. But I do think The Stand has had an influence, and it certainly has had an influence on my life. I think I've written 2 books that people come up and mention time and time again. I sometimes think, you know, I could have kicked the bucket in 1985. It would have been okay. People say, man, I really like that book hit. That Pennywise scared the shit out of me. Or they'll say, man, I really love The Stand. So, you know, people like those things. Now, I want to thank you all for coming tonight from the bottom of my heart, because you really made me... No. That's no bullshit, really, because this is scary for a guy like me. I'm used to working in a little room, and the interaction that I have is stuff like, would you please take out the trash, and that sort of thing. So this is really special. Now, so two jumper cables walk into a bar, and the bartender says, well, all right, I'll serve you, but don't start anything. I'm getting the hell out.